It was important for me that they would be nervous of me, that I was a foreign, that I was a woman, that I wanted them to feel uncomfortable, because I wanted to express that sense of being up against a wall, and the implication of that, and the loss of power, and all those things of what I feel and what I also feel about the situation. So I think that the actual act of photography it wasn't technical. I wanted this thing to happen between me and the person in the moment. It was very intentional.
And the background is clearly very important. The title of the work alludes to this. And again, mentioned in your paper, you talk of the Palestinians being imprisoned by the wall. However, there is a feeling, of course, that the imprisonment is of both protagonists in the situation. I just wondered if you could comment on that.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned that I feel the Israelis are also imprisoned. In many ways, the Palestinians are less imprisoned because, although they are physically, unable to get certain resources that they need, and they do have to go through checkpoints, and I'm not in any way underestimating the day-to-day difficulty of their existence. The Palestinians are in a state of resistance. In a way, the wall that is there is a wall to be broken. And the Israelis are actually, in my view, far more imprisoned because they are stuck with nowhere to go. Actually, the Palestinians are in movement. It's only, obviously, it's very, it's still a very, at the impasse, in a way the wall is still standing, but all walls come down, and it will come down, and the question is when or how or where. It's just waiting to happen.
And getting back to the project, of course it's not complete until the work is exhibited, and in the case of your work that's quite important because, of course, the individuals, the portraits of the individuals are effectively forced into a room and they're forced to confront each other. The images are placed in a room opposite each other. How does the dynamic of the work change when you see it, when you physically walk into that room, and how does the dynamic of the work change from the individual portraits to the exhibition as a whole?
Well, it was very important to choose images that I thought were very strong in themselves as individuals, and then I didn't know until I actually put the work together and made the men face each other, which is of course the idea of the work, that they will all face each other, what sort of impact that will have, and if it will hold some kind of energy. I noticed that what actually happens is that the men start all to look at you. So in fact, when you stand in the room, rather than them really looking at each other, your experience as the viewer is that they're all looking at you, each one of them. And the sense of really not having an idea of who's Palestinian and who's Israeli, I think is initially I thought that was a very sort of diluted aspect of the work, that it's very sort of superficial, that you don't know. But actually, when it's on the wall, it's quite significant, because the moment you do lose this perspective of who do you belong to, which group do you belong to, the next step is to recognise that it really doesn't matter, that these are just men. And then when you begin to look at them as men, there was this sort of it was very interesting to watch women go into the space, because actually what happens is the women start to look at them as men, and then of course they're just choosing which men they think's the most attractive, which in the beginning was a bit shocking, but actually it's wonderful, because that's exactly how women might look at a group of men. So they weren't being judged in terms of their ethnicity, and they are being looked at just as humans, although you could argue, I suppose, that the women are looking at them as the other. Now I think about it. Don't put that in. Can I wipe that last bit out?
But how do you feel about the work potentially being used in that context as propaganda?
I would hope this work is just about humanity, it's just about people. It's not. It's a very, very simple statement about how we are more alike than different, and how when we are truly individuals who own our own selves, as it were, we can stand opposite another and be who we are without feeling threatened or project ourselves onto another. It's very, very simple. It for me personally relates to how men and women are, how we are with our children. I mean, it's just the fact that I've chosen to use two peoples in conflict is only a way almost to kind of highlight or exaggerate the idea of psychological separation, which is what I believe needs to happen on a kind of state level in order for there to be peace. As though each individual person needs to somehow own themselves and own their psychology and own their fears and vulnerability. And only from this position can we move on and face another as whole, as it were. Sounds a bit much, but I think that's, you know, it's a very simple point.
So finally, Fiona, you've spoken of the fact that once in the room, as anonymous portraits, it is impossible to identify the Israeli from the Palestinian. And having read the artist's statement and experiencing the exhibition, I find this quite a profound feeling, as if actually you have made change. And I know you mentioned earlier that that wasn't probably top of the list, but how would you respond to my comment that in fact you are making a change, you are causing an effect?
Well, obviously I'd be more than delighted if I felt that by looking at the work something changed inside somebody else. I mean, you know, you can't hope for more than that really, that something you've done will have an effect and also will raise some degree of awareness or will at least create a debate. Or so my response is, you know, to feel very grateful that could happen. And it would be, it's naive of me to say that I wouldn't desire it, because of course I would desire that the work will resonate and it will affect people and they may, you know, have a different view or think differently. I mean, ideally it would be fantastic if Israelis and Palestinians had a different view. But I think that when I say that I've done it from a very personal place, I think it's because I'm very fearful of trying to make work with the aim of creating change, because I'm not entirely sure that, well, I'm slightly uncomfortable with this position that somebody who doesn't live in this situation, doesn't live there and is an onlooker, sort of almost has the audacity to think that they can come in and do something. So that's why maybe it's a slight defence to say, you know, this is very personal work. There's always been an element to the work which of course is about raising awareness. I think it's naive to suggest that there isn't that aspect. And when I made the book about my daughter Ophir, I made it really from a place of my own personal need. You know, it was a way that I expressed the relationship and understood it, and the way that I had an opportunity really to deepen my experience of bringing up a child with Down syndrome. But there was an element, of course, to the book which was about raising awareness about disability. So I don't think you can separate the two. I mean, the moment you do something which may have an interest socially, you are wanting somehow to change people's perspective. And I'd like to think that the same thing is true of the Palestinians and the Israelis, but it isn't kind of the initial drive. The initial drive is much more deeply rooted in my own personal makeup, that I need to make this comment and it's very specific, and I'm not trying to talk about, like when I did the work about Ophir, I wasn't trying to talk about become the voice of disability or the voice of Down syndrome, or this is how it is. This is how it is for us. Very, very small. And I think I feel the same way about Beyond the Wall. This is how it is for me. This is my experience. This is my ideal world, that I will create a space that these people will stand together and they'll realise that they're brothers and not enemies. It's my own naive world. So if anybody comes in and they're affected by it and they feel that that world is good or it resonates with them, then it's fantastic.
Well, thank you, Fiona. That's fantastic to have an insight into your work.
Pleasure.